So today's episode is going to be another, I guess, paranormal tale. It's kind of an interesting case that I came across. It's known as it's known as Flight 513. Um, that apparently landed several years after it took off. So, actually, even several decades. So, I'm going to skip this initial section because it doesn't. It is more to do with the website, and we're going to start right here. Okay, so I've done a couple of episodes on similar kinds of things where people seem to be either walking into another dimension, like the man from Taured, where he, went to the Japanese airport, but he didn't have documentation that corroborated the expected documents one would have for this particular timeline. He seemed to be from another timeline. One might say another dimension, but I think it's another timeline. And he had documents that were reflective of a world in which a country named Taured still existed. And no one knows if that's a hoax or what exactly happened. But that's one of those cases where he kind of came into this world and sort of disappeared, but he was from a very similar enough timeline that he was able to function within this timeline. It was just that when he was required to show his paperwork, it was off as far as the authorities were concerned, because there is no country called Taured in our experience. So this is sort of similar in that sometimes, well, not really sometimes, but there were experiments that were being done in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and probably afterwards, trying to see if they can move objects through space-time continuums in such a way that they could jump time and space. And the Germans were working on this with their Bell experiment. If you want to look something up, I think I also did an episode on that as well. The Nazi Bell. It's just this bell-shaped object where, participants could go inside, and then once they turned that machine on, it would literally zap out of view and show up in another location. But that specifically had to do with, I guess, a magnetic grid had to be in place, an electromagnetic grid had to be in place at the location that the bell started at, that the machine or whatever it was started at, and then it had to go to a matching zone with, the same kind of frequency or whatever it was. It's just that that machine also seemed to have some sort of a time lapse involved with the jump that would occur. And then I think I talked about the Philadelphia experiment. These were the experiments that were done after the Nazis came to the United States, and they were trying to jump objects, like large objects, like boats and from naval yards from one location to the other, similarly building a electromagnetic grid around them, and then having another one in another area. But even with those experiments, it seemed to be that there was a time lapse that would occur. You would either jump back or forward in time. It was never, with a precise situation. And then, because those were early experiments, there's all kinds of anecdotal information about, how they went awry and that people were mangled and various things happened. I'm not really sure if all of those stories are true, just because I don't know why they would ever do an experiment of that type with officers, or people of any kind on the boat. You know what I mean? They would probably just do the object without anybody. That's just my belief. Eventually, I'm sure they tried to move humans, and maybe issues with that. But this is somewhat similar, and it's occurring in the same time frame that a lot of these experiments were going on. Um, so, you know, there's a lot that we don't know about in terms of what the Nazis were working on, and then all of that information and all of the scientific research that they were doing, much of it came to the United States, and again went underground into this sort of underground military complex where they were doing all kinds of experimentation on amazing devices, amazing machinery, technology that they've never disclosed publicly. We only get glimpses of it when, you know, insiders reveal a little bit, and it's not clear if those are setups, you know, are those people paid by the military, like are they agents, disinfo agents, giving a little bit of information and then, you know, putting it off into a different direction, which is a very common type of psyop that occurs within the military to kind of throw people off, because it's not just about throwing the public off. A lot of times there's a war going on between countries in terms of the technology that they've developed, and so they, you know, in the 40s and 50s there was the Cold War, so they didn't want the tech that they were developing in the United States to be, you know, become part of Russia's arsenal and so forth, and so they were very protective, and so this methodology of disclosing a little bit but then having it veer off into another direction is a very common procedure that they do. Okay, so I don't know, we'll discuss whether this might be something similar, but the time frame that it occurred in was during that time frame that a lot of these experiments were going on. So here we go. A standard flight across the Atlantic Ocean, Santiago Flight 513 left the runway in Aachen, then West Germany, on the afternoon of September 4th, 1954. The Lockheed Super Constellation's planned destination was Chile in South America. On board were 88 passengers and 4 crew. There was nothing special, at least knowingly, about the flight. There were no special passengers and no mysterious cargo. It was a standard flight across the Atlantic Ocean that operated regularly. However, several hours later, while over the Atlantic, the plane simply disappeared. They would just vanish from the radar screen, and all contact ceased. No wreckage would surface, and no distress signals came in. They had quite literally, it would seem, vanished into thin air. No one, with no other information to go on and no wreckage to study, the main theory was that the plane experienced difficulties and crashed into the Atlantic Ocean. All 92 people on board were officially declared dead. However, the case was still officially unexplained and unsolved. Many other theories were put forth as to what might have happened over the years. Was it a case of mass alien abduction? Were they victims of some unknown Bermuda Triangle type phenomenon? Had they entered a wormhole or a portal? As bizarre as some of these alternative theories undoubtedly are, when a strange plane suddenly reappeared in October of 1989 in Brazilian airspace, it would make many people look again at these apparently crazy suggestions a little more seriously. A sudden reappearance and landing. On the afternoon of the 12th of October, 1989, a plane would suddenly appear, as if out of nowhere, over the skies of Port Alegre in Brazil. Repeated attempts to communicate with the mysterious aircraft were made by the control tower at the airport below. All, however, would go unanswered. The plane was circling the airport, which it did several times before it eventually came to land on one of the runways. Given the highly mysterious and potentially watched, several of them began to get an eerie feeling about how events were unfolding, not least due to the Santiago Airlines logo on the side of the aircraft, who had been out of business for over 3 decades, since 1956. Even more bizarre, upon researching the plane's serial number, the system would declare that this was Santiago Flight 513, the plane that had mysteriously disappeared without a trace in September of 1954. The aircraft itself appeared brand new, as if it were a standard plane operating in the then modern age. It certainly had no aging that one might expect for a plane that had allegedly been missing for over 30 years. Then, with the engines of the plane running as if they were brand new and ready for takeoff, the team would enter this most mysterious and long-vanished vehicle. After gaining entry through one of the passengers' doors, the unit began to board this mysterious aircraft. As they did, each looked around with feelings ranging from disbelief to absolute horror. In the seats, as if part of a macabre display, sat the skeletal remains of the passengers of the flight. Upon entering the cockpit, they would find the same with the 4 crew members. Perhaps as a further twist to the surreal scene was the sight of the captain, Miguel Curry's skeletal hands still holding on to the controls. Of course, once the crew began to regain their composure, the question of just how the plane not only managed to circle the airport, but perform a standard near-perfect landing with no one other than the 92 skeletons on board arose. While word obviously leaked out of the incident, which let's not forget occurred in full view of a busy airport, the high-ranking airport official employees would remain tight-lipped regarding the apparent encounter. Some would even accuse them of actively attempting to cover up the events. The Brazilian authorities would state that the strange plane had appeared over the airport and landed there. They would, however, say nothing else, at least publicly, of the incident. With this sudden and strange appearance, theories once again went into overdrive, and as you might imagine, many people were more than critical of the Brazilian authorities' handling of the incident, speculating that it could be proof of strange phenomena such as wormholes. For example, physics professor Rodrigo de Manhawat states that such a discovery would change the way we view our world and alter science as we know it. He would also state it is a crime to keep information like this secret. Many believe the account of Flight 513 of Santiago is nothing more than a hoax that now enjoys an urban legend status. That could very well be the case, after all, even if we got our hands around the notion of wormholes and portals, or even time travel. How did the plane land so successfully without a crew to guide it down? We could speculate endlessly for possible reasons. Perhaps if we accept the wormhole theory for a moment, they were alive for a time, then entering 1989, however, maybe space-time caught up to them upon landing and reduced them to skeletal remains. Maybe we should look again at the Lockheed connection. Might the flight have been part of some kind of experiment with secret technology, possibly even reverse-engineered alien technology? Once again, it is pure speculation, but there were and still are a substantial number of U.S. air bases in West Germany, and if a test of some kind of highly advanced top-secret technology was to take place, it would also make sense to that would happen away from the skies of the United States, Costello was another who would voice concerns that Flight 513 was obviously proof of a strange phenomenon. He would state that the plane had almost certainly entered a time warp. There is no other explanation for it. Of course, Santiago Flight 513 is certainly not the only case of a disappearance, followed by a mysterious reappearance. Perhaps the most famous of these, while much shorter and not at all fatal, was National Airlines Flight 727. Although small details of the account sometimes changed the location and date, it would appear, according to an account of the incident in the 24th of March 1975 edition of the Deseret News, the incident took place sometime in 1970 as the aircraft approached Miami International Airport. As it began to approach to land, however, the plane suddenly vanished from the radar screens of the control tower. All communications would also cease instantly. Fearing an explosion at the worst, emergency response teams scrambled to the runways in anticipation of landing debris or a crippled craft. An alert would go out to all other pilots in the immediate vicinity to report visual confirmation of Flight 727 or any sighting of a crashed plane on the ground. And then, as a quiet realization that the loss of life was likely to be high spread over the tower, the plane suddenly reappeared. With the sudden reappearance, the radio communication also came back to life. What was strange, however, was that the crew would act as if nothing strange had occurred. In fact, to them, 10 minutes hadn't passed by. They were only speaking to the control a few moments ago as they began their approach. When flight attendants were discreetly asked later if anything strange had happened on board the flight as it approached the airport, all answered no. It was a routine landing. Bizarrely, the plane's onboard clocks would show a 10-minute difference to the control tower. Indeed, they were behind any clock. It was as if one air control staff member said, "For 10 minutes, you just did not exist." The crew who would do time checks to ensure there were no faults with the onboard clock against the control tower had performed such a check only 20 minutes before making their approach to land. And indeed, aside from the 10-minute difference, all the clocks appeared to work as they should. Martin Caden, who claimed to speak to several of those involved at the control tower, would disclose more apparent details of the incident. He would state that the crew, and especially the passengers, were completely surprised as to why there was such interest in them and their plane, especially such official-looking people. Caden would write that federal investigators and officials of national airlines couldn't get into that jetliner fast enough, while the passengers knew nothing of the incident. Even they would eventually notice the 10-minute difference with their watches. This, combined with the suspicious official activity, would make some of them ponder the circumstances. Might these officials have known more than they let on? Again, while it is only speculation, is it possible the rush of federal investigators to board the plane was to see the results of those on board? Had there been some kind of secret experiment to skip the plane forward 10 minutes? And if so, had this experiment proven successful? Many researchers, including Caden, would suggest that the eagerness to board the plane was not out of concern or a sense of duty to the passengers and crew, but one of wanting to maintain control of the situation and to ensure as little information as possible entered the public arena. Perhaps this is why there are so few reports of such incidents, leaving them instead to what are to some questionable platforms. This alone assists in damaging the credibility of such accounts. details are open to debate, perhaps intentionally so. There are several examples of these mysterious aerial incidents in more contemporary times. While some reports of an airliner carrying 170 passengers became the unintentional victim of a time wave created by CERN in November 2009, it was instantly transported over 5,000 miles away from the skies of Bolivia to somewhere off the coast of the Canary Islands. According to the same time, a blackout struck Bolivia, leaving the country in blackness for some time. Before the plane's position was near the gate of the gun itself, it's said to have portal-like capabilities from ancient times connected to the magnetic fields of the Earth. Did these natural magnetic forces react with the forces of CERN to create a wormhole? Okay, so I think that's it then. So I did see the little video clips. They really did not go into anything specifically, useful in terms of this particular flight. But according to a couple of articles, no one seems to dispute the fact that a plane did land in Brazil in 1989. That was an unexpected, it was not part of their roster. It just literally came out of nowhere. It was not on the radar, and then suddenly there was a plane circling, ready to land, and as soon as the runway was clear, it landed, and it did so without any kind of communication between the tower and the plane, because, if it was the older plane, then it wouldn't have the same, capabilities of modern planes to communicate with the modern tower in Brazil. Like, it would be using a different system. So they do say, apparently this part of it is not disputed, that a plane did land, and it was not an expected plane. And according to eyewitnesses, the logo on this plane was the Santiago Airlines logo, and that company had gone defunct in 1956. 1954, the plane had disappeared, and that might have even contributed to the airline situation. But I think the significant factor for me anyway was that, one, it was occurring in the 50s. That was right in the time frame that they were doing experiments. And as the article said, it's always going to be suspicious when these when the flight took off from West Germany, because that was the seat of all of this technological experimentation that was going on with the Nazis. And it doesn't mean just because they officially had lost the war, all of these scientists were now in the United States. They had new passports and I guess a new lease on life. But the bases, the military bases that the Americans built in Germany were primarily to contain a lot of the experimentation that had already been done in Germany, and maybe was not so easily moved, to the United States, especially if they had built grids and these sort of electromagnetic fields in certain areas. They probably, were not going to move those, but would definitely want to utilize all of this work that had already gone into the very initial experiments of whatever tech they were using. So just the fact that this flight was taking off from Germany kind of makes it suspicious that it probably was one of these experimental planes. Now, the question is, why would they experiment, with a regular crew and people? It's possible that it was not intentional. It's possible that a couple of things might have been going on. They may have had a crude version of CERN that, CERN didn't just develop in the early 90s or whenever they were starting to build that object. I mean, they had done initial experimentation with smaller type colliders, and I'm sure that they had something like that going on in Germany or in different places in Europe. And when those kinds of experiments happen, according to people who live in CERN, in and around that area, portals develop that they can see in the sky. Basically, it looks like, I mean, you can look them up on the internet. I know a lot of people say that, oh, it's photoshopped and whatever, but I'm not 100% sure. It seems like there are events that are occurring in the sky right over CERN when it's on, and the news has even, talked about the sky changing dramatically. They might not show a wormhole, but just the fact that whatever CERN is doing is affecting the clouds and whatever is going on above it should be concerning. I would think I would be a little bit concerned about that, but they've already discussed publicly that CERN is possibly able to open up small black holes, so they're calling them black holes. But I think that portals and wormholes are definitely a possibility with whatever experimentation they're doing at the collider site. And in the early part of the 40s and 50s, they had these initial experiments going on with much smaller type colliders. So it's very possible that they had some sort of either onboard tech, or they were just doing experiments in that area when the flight took off, and it created some sort of a portal once that plane was a little bit, once it was over the ocean. And it may have, similar to the Bell experiments, transported the object, whatever it was, to a different location. Now, in the first couple of Bell experiments, they were able to move, jump the Bell. It was almost like a jump type situation from one location to another, with a little bit of a time differential. It was generally a couple of days. The participants within the Bell, however, were fine. They were maybe a little disoriented, but not, as far as they were concerned, that same amount of time had not occurred in their experience. So they were, as far as they were concerned, in the bell-shaped object for, a couple of minutes. But as far as we were concerned, it was several days, sometimes in some cases several months, and then in some cases, according to some unofficial Army anecdotes, that that bell-shaped object ended up, I think, in Philadelphia or someplace in the United States. So, it's jumping location and time, and doing so sometimes by a very large amount. So I don't know exactly if they had any kind of particular control over it. It seems that in the initial experimentation, they really didn't know what was going to happen in terms of how long it was going to take, and they didn't have an ability to control everything that precisely. They seemed to understand that you had to have a matching magnetic grid underneath it in the location that it lifts off from and in the location that it lands. But there seem to have been other variables involved with this that were affecting the timing and location sometimes of where this bell would occur. So what was happening? Was it going through a wormhole or some kind of a portal? It's possible that that's what was going on, and it temporarily seems like it disappears from our view and then shows up at this other location. And that is possibly something that CERN is able to do. I mean, they say that they're able to do something to that effect. They might not be telling us the whole story, though. And so since this flight left from Germany, where they were doing experiments like this, possibly entered this wormhole, the crazy thing is that, 30 years later or something like that, for a plane to land in Brazil the same logo. You know, it's not that easy to find a logo that is that old, and to have it in, you know, put it on a plane and it's in pristine condition, and it's a plane from the 50s, etc. I mean, the amount of work that would, if this was just a complete hoax, the amount of work that would go into it, it's ridiculous. And why do it? What would be the point? Because it's not like they ever made any kind of official story or anything like that. Like, I don't even know what the hoaxer would gain by something of this nature. Where I think you have disinformation coming across, though, is an attempt of, you know, whoever the officials were, to kind of confuse the issue and basically have the public dismiss it altogether. The thing is, this event occurred at a major airport in broad daylight, so there were a lot of witnesses who saw the plane land, not just the, you know, on-ground crew members and all of the people at the tower, because they were obviously concerned when this sort of situation is happening. This plane shows up out of nowhere, but, you know, there are people at the airport too. Everybody saw this plane land. So a plane lands coming out of nowhere. It's a plane from the 1950s, looking brand new, with the logo of a defunct airline, you know, pristinely printed on the side, and a whole crew of officials run out to see what's going on with this particular plane. The serial number matches flight 513, so they're already concerned, and that's pretty much where I think the story ends in terms of what officially happened. I think the rest of it is an effort by the officials to, you know, make it seem kind of hokey and urban legend and spooky and whatever, and just make people think it's a big joke. The idea that they went on board and everyone's a skeleton, this part of it I think is made up completely. The reason is, first of all, how did the plane land? A skeleton did not land the plane. So they're saying, okay, well, maybe, you know, they were alive and well as they entered or came out the other end of this portal or wormhole or whatever. He had the 5 or 6, I don't know how long he was circling the runway, and then in all that time he was still intact up until the point that they landed, and then, like, you know, in Indiana Jones movie, everyone deteriorated because it was, you know, the time had caught up with them. I think that part of it is totally made up. First of all, skeletons are not going to be, you know, it's not like a Halloween haunted house where the skeletons are all intact, you know, like a medical examiner skeleton where they're all fixed up. If they were going to be bones, they would just be a pile of bones and a pile of clothes. They're not going to have the, you know, hands clutching. There are no tendons or ligaments or anything holding it together. So, you know, already it's a made-up story as far as the people on board were concerned, you know, being in that condition. So I don't think that part is true. I think this is where they get into the effort to try and confuse the issue and kind of dismiss it publicly. What I think might have happened, though, and this is based on other anecdotal information about this flight, was that the plane did land and they did escort people out of the plane, intact people that were alive and well. No one could tell, you know, are these people from the 50s or whatever, but they were not skeletons. They didn't remove bags of skeletons from the plane. They apparently, people got off that plane and a person landed the plane as well. So I think to get people off of the story, they didn't want a situation where people would want to interview, you know, all of these individuals and find out what had happened to them and what did they experience and so forth. But I think that what could have happened was the same thing with the Nazi Bell experiment, where, you know, they entered whatever it was, a time lapse or was just to confuse the issue and to have people distracted from the fact that there were survivors and they didn't want anyone talking to these individuals. So probably what happened, because similar to that Bell experiment where they just showed up in the United States, I don't know if it was 2 decades later or what, those people had not aged. They were, as far as they were concerned, the normal amount of time had passed. But, several years had passed as far as we were concerned. I think it was a very similar situation with this plane. The question is, was it done purposefully or by mistake? Who knows if they had a device on the plane or if they were running one of those Hadron Collider, like, more simplified versions in the 1950s, testing it out, and this plane by chance, leaving from that airspace, happened to enter into a wormhole. It seems like it would be a situation like that, where a wormhole was developed during a time when they were not very careful or aware of how these portals were coming about. They maybe were not aware of all of the magnetic grid type situations that occur naturally, and that's probably what was affecting everything. So this plane enters this, experience. They don't feel like time has passed. Over 30 years pass. They show up thinking that they've, come to their right location. They land just to find out that so much time has passed, they probably had not aged. And, officials do not want anyone knowing about this, because they would then have to reveal all of this technology that they've been working on. And that's something like CERN, which I don't think had been up yet. I think they were still collecting funding for CERN. In '89, they definitely would never have disclosed something like this publicly, because if they did, it was going to cause an uproar that now they were trying to build a huge collider that is able to do this kind of stuff. People would be very scared. So I have a feeling that this entire incident was hushed up, except for the fact that so many people saw the plane land, and they then had to make this silly story of skeletons being on board, and skeletons that were sitting intact without anything holding them together and in their suits, and the pilot is holding on to the planes, and all of this is like, clearly that part of it is made up. But the landing did apparently happen, and so I think that's maybe what occurred, is that where the plane took off from, it just happened to enter into a portal. They probably didn't see it. It might not have been obviously visible in the daytime hours, because in the nighttime hours when they've taken those photographs, you can sort of see it. These sort of swirly type, formations in the sky above CERN, so you can see that something is going on above there, and in the daytime I don't think a pilot would be able to even see it, and who knows if it sort of sucks a person in, or the object in, into that space. And it's so bizarre, because it's hard to even understand how something like that could work, that many years can go by but they don't feel it. They never ran out of fuel, none of that, so it's like they're in a limbo phase for so many decades. But even according to this recent plane example that they gave with the Miami flight, they didn't realize that 10-minute time lapse. It's difficult to realize a 10-minute freeze, basically. But 10 minutes, where did those 10 minutes worth of fuel go? Like, were they literally in a sort of vacuum when these kinds of things happen? And I mean, are they sort of frozen somewhere? It's very bizarre. That part of it, I don't understand how that would possibly work, because there's a physical issue of fuel being utilized, and all of these other factors. I don't know how something like that would work. But then in that Bell experiment, they were not using fuel, they were using mercury and something else. So I don't know if the plane itself had that thing on it, or it just entered into a time zone. just seemingly disappeared off the radar for 10 minutes and then luckily showed up back again without, anybody really noticing anything other than the time lapse. But obviously, since there were officials ready to get onto the plane right after that, they do know something is up. There clearly is more information about this out there within the secret military complex than they'll ever let us know about. And whether that's because there's still a kind of competition going on between countries, or they just don't want the public to know the kinds of stuff that they're working on, because there would be a tremendous amount of backlash, I would think. Because, if you're making portals in the sky and planes are flying around, or just wormholes opening up anywhere and that people can enter them at any time, that's very dangerous and scary, and they don't want people in an uproar. But at the same time, they want to experiment and figure this thing out to see how they can utilize it, to see if they can gain something from it, jumping objects or whatever it is into different locations with a kind of warp speed. Like, if they can figure out how to control it. At this point, they probably do have a better idea of how to do it. The fact that so many countries joined together to build CERN is, something in and of itself. That entire group of individuals, willing to put down money for this particular piece of machinery, essentially technology, to be developed, just means that a lot of these countries know something. They had come to a point that they had figured out how to use this, whatever it is, whatever the collider is actually able to do. It cannot just be for simple experiments the way that they're talking about, especially when you see this phenomenon occurring in the sky above, and then the fact that they even admit they're able to open up these little wormholes, little black holes. Oh, but it's nothing, it's fine, don't worry about it. I mean, I don't think it's so as safe as they want to claim it is. In another article about CERN that just came out this week, they apparently took a mummy from Egypt, like an Egyptian mummy, and sent it through the collider. Again, these are so silly sounding that I know everyone would just dismiss it like, oh, it's nothing. But then, somebody, apparently there was a delivery of this kind of an object. They do have strange, hokey things going on at CERN. They've got video of these weird rituals happening over there. They've got a Hindu goddess, in front of built, as a statue in front of CERN. Stuff is going on that they're not telling us, and as well as the scientists from CERN. Some of them put out clues like posters with the word mandala and bond and that kind of stuff, which make it very suspicious in terms of, hinting at that what it's possibly able to do. But as far as this case is concerned, I think it was a case where this plane either purposefully or by mistake entered some sort of a wormhole or portal, and because they were not aware of how to control the time element, or to figure out how to estimate the time element, it ended up disappearing for that length of time, just to come and land at its correct location. But more than 30 years later, I do think that part of the story, the again anecdotal type information about observers seeing the people being escorted off the plane, that is probably true. I don't think there were any skeletons. I think that there were intact individuals on the plane, and they were escorted out, taken to a military base for debriefing, and never heard from again, and were told never to do an interview. And I mean, look, it's now 30 some years later. Many of their family members might have already have passed on. So I think if they had scared them enough, they're not, I mean, where are they going to publish any of these stories? They really can't. just want to get out of there. If they did let them free, you don't even know if that's the case. I mean, they could have just disposed of them, but I think that that part of the story where people witnessed individuals leaving the plane, that's probably more true than this skeletal business. I think that's just to confuse everybody and, dismiss the entire story. But they can't dismiss the fact that a plane landed that was not supposed to be there and that had a logo from a defunct airlines from 30 years before. Obviously, no one can check to be sure about the serial number, but I don't think that that part of it is made up. I think that it was Flight 513, and that it, for whatever reason, was involved with this situation, and based on even the location that it left from, would make it highly likely that it was involved with some sort of a time manipulation experiment of some kind. And that's what I think happens. It's interesting. I wish I knew more about these kinds of things, but it's only like in these glimpses of little silly sounding cases where you get little glimpses about what colliders like CERN and so forth are capable of doing. They're building, I think the one in Japan, I think the one in China is already built, and then they have 2 more in the United States that they're building, and there was another one in Russia that was in the process of being built. This cannot just be for simple experiments. They're doing something with these. I think they've now figured out how to use them to their advantage, but they're never going to tell us that, oh, okay, we're able to move, huge objects from one location to the next, and we don't know how far these portals are able to go, or if they've figured out how to, like, let's say, create portals to different planets, maybe. I mean, rather than sending, a rocket so far with so much fuel and the amount of time that it takes, and even the question of whether a rocket can even leave Earth's atmosphere because of the Van Allen belt and so forth. Many people think that that's not the way that they do space travel anyway. That's more of a hoax that NASA has put on, that, to have people believe that metal rockets can get through the Van Allen belt, when even NASA scientists say that it would burn up. Like, they've said it on video that no, you can't get past that particular thing that is around the Earth. It's a very dense layer of extraordinary heat that would melt any metal. It's basically a protective layer that prevents asteroids from hitting us. It's designed essentially to melt rock, so it would easily eradicate any kind of metallic object coming through it. So they may not be doing space travel in the way that we think that they're doing it. They might be using these kind of jump rooms or jump portals to get people from one location and to the other and bypass this particular protective barrier around the Earth. But they don't want to tell us that because, I don't know, it'll bring up all of these other issues in terms of the other experiments that they've done, and who knows what's been going on. But I do think that a lot of stuff was happening starting right around the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and that all of that's tech and the people who were behind the either back engineering or whatever they were doing all came to the United States, or a large number of them. Some went to Russia, some went to England. They were dispersed amongst different countries, but a huge number came to the United States. And then suddenly our space program started. NASA was developed, and all these other things happened. Like, literally, our technology moved by leaps and bounds as soon as these guys came over with whatever they had learned, whatever they had possibly found and back engineered from their trip to Antarctica. The Nazis had taken a on things that were above and beyond anything to do with direct warfare, in the manner that they were fighting it publicly. So there was a lot happening, and just by kind of defeating that group, they just, all of these other countries were able to grab the individuals who were directly involved with it, and I think they took a lot of materials too, because right after that point, right after the war, military bases were developed in a huge number all over the world. Like suddenly, from just a handful, there were then over 1,000 within a very short period of time. These deep underground bases were developed. So what are they doing in there? They're obviously doing stuff that they're hiding, from the public. That they're going miles and miles underground, building these huge facilities. They're holding some kind of materials and doing experiments, and there's a huge black budget, and I think there are a lot of public places and programs that the public sees, things like NASA and so forth, that gets a lot of funding, but that funding might not be going the way that we, into the things that we think that it's going into. It might be going into something else completely. And, like I said, I'm not sure if they'll ever tell us, but then every couple of decades, a kind of blast of technology sort of hits us. Is stuff that they've actually had for a long time, for the last however many decades, but then it becomes, available to the public. Yeah, even a decade ago, people, wouldn't believe the kinds of things that we can do with our cell phones, and it's just something so simple, but they probably had these for a while, and they now made it a situation that, okay, every year they kind of slightly advance the same machine, more or less, and people buy it, but the thing is that they probably had the tech for a long time. Just like I have all of these great videos of these amazing cars, like, flying cars and hovering cars. I think it was Volkswagen that just has this amazing kind of hovering vehicle. It looks like this circular sphere kind of a thing where you just sit in it and it hovers above the ground. It totally looks like something out of a movie, but that's something that Volkswagen has at this point, and they probably had this stuff for a while, is what I'm saying, and then they just kind of give bits and pieces to different companies. They buy the rights to it or whatever. I don't know how it works, or if some of the scientists that are working on it then also work at these companies, and then they're able to bring some of their tech with them in bits and pieces, and it'll be outrageously expensive initially, and then once enough laws have changed and they've made whatever adjustments they